I never considered myself a hacker. I know that's probably the first thing people expect to hear whenever someone tells a story about the dark web or anonymous websites, but the truth is a lot less exciting. I couldn't break into bank accounts or write computer viruses. Most of what I knew came from watching videos online and reading articles whenever I couldn't sleep. My actual job was graphic design, logos, advertisements, website banners, social media posts. The kind of work that people barely notice unless it's done badly. I worked from home, so almost every client I had came through the internet. Some found me through freelance websites, others through email, and occasionally someone would contact me through smaller forums where people looked for designers willing to work quickly without asking too many questions. Most of my clients were perfectly normal. Small businesses, online shops, people starting clothing brands that never really went anywhere. The occasional YouTuber wanting a new banner. Nothing unusual. Looking back, I think that's why the strange client slipped past my instincts. When something unusual arrives after hundreds of ordinary jobs, it doesn't stand out as much as you'd think. It was just another message. No greeting, no name, just a single sentence. I was given your details. Are you available? That was it. No profile picture, no company logo, no signature. I replied asking what kind of project they had in mind. About 5 minutes later, another message arrived. I need simple graphics, fast work, good payment. I asked for details. Instead of answering, they transferred half the payment before I had even accepted the job. That had never happened before. Freelancers usually spend days chasing invoices. This person had sent several £100 within minutes. I remember staring at the notification on my phone, convinced it had to be some kind of mistake. Then another message arrived. Can you start tonight? Money has a funny way of convincing you that things are normal. If someone had asked me to do the same job for £20, I probably would have ignored them. But after seeing that payment, I opened my laptop. The first task seemed almost laughably simple. A logo, black background, white lettering, nothing flashy. No company slogan, no images, just a name. The name itself didn't mean anything to me. It sounded like one of those technology startups that appear every week before quietly disappearing a month later. I finished the logo in less than an hour. The client replied almost immediately, "Good." Then another payment appeared. No revisions, no complaints, just more money. Over the next week, the jobs kept coming. Icons, buttons, simple website layouts, nothing illegal, nothing offensive, nothing that made me uncomfortable. The client rarely used more than a few words. Change this, use darker colors, remove the border. Perfect. Sometimes an entire conversation would contain fewer than 20 words, yet every payment arrived within minutes. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the company name online. Nothing. No website, no social media, no business registration. It was as though the company didn't exist. I wasn't particularly concerned. Plenty of people buy branding before launching a business. I assumed they simply hadn't gone public yet. Then another project arrived. This one was different. Instead of creating graphics from scratch, I was asked to edit an existing image. It looked like a screenshot of a website. Most of the page had been blurred. The client wanted a few icons replaced and a color changed. Simple enough. As I zoomed in to work on the image, I noticed something odd. Hidden beneath one of the blurred sections was a tiny piece of text that hadn't been covered properly. Only 3 words, verified vendor list. That was all. It didn't mean much. Online stores have verified sellers all the time. I made the requested changes and sent the file back. Another payment, another one-word reply. Excellent. The following evening they sent another screenshot. Again, most of it was blurred. Again, they only wanted cosmetic changes. This time I noticed another word beneath the blur. Escrow. I recognized that one. I'd heard people mention escrow services when buying expensive items online. Still nothing alarming. Just another website. Just another job. I carried on. Over the next month I became their regular designer. The payments grew larger, sometimes absurdly large. I'd spend 20 minutes changing the color of a button and receive enough money to cover my rent. Friends joked that I'd found the perfect client. I joked back that I hoped they never disappeared. I wish they had. One rainy Thursday evening, I was editing another screenshot when I accidentally dragged one of the blurred layers sideways. Just for a second. It wasn't intentional. My mouse slipped. The hidden section beneath flashed into view before I quickly moved it back. But I'd already seen enough. Rows of listings, prices, usernames, star ratings, everything laid out in neat columns. It looked familiar, not because I'd visited a website like it, because I'd seen documentaries about them. Dark web marketplaces, the kind people always mention in true crime videos. I sat there staring at the screen. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't panicking. Mostly I just felt confused. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Then I noticed one listing title before I closed the file: Remote Access Packages. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but something inside me finally whispered that perhaps I should stop asking so few questions. I completed the work anyway. I wish I could tell you I immediately walked away. I didn't. I sent the file, collected the payment, closed my laptop, spent the rest of the evening pretending nothing had happened. The following morning I decided I wouldn't accept any more work from them. Simple. Professional, no confrontation, just decline future projects. A message arrived before lunch. "I have another task," I replied. "I'm sorry, I'm too busy with other work." Several minutes passed, then another message appeared. "I'll double the payment." I stared at it, closed the conversation, made myself another coffee. When I returned, there was another message. "I understand." That should have been the end of it. Instead, a final sentence appeared beneath it. "Nice house." I frowned. It was probably a joke, an awkward attempt at humor. People say strange things online all the time. I ignored it. 5 minutes later, another message arrived. "The blue car outside has been there since 9. My stomach tightened. I looked through my living room window. Across the road sat a blue hatchback. I'd never paid attention to it before. Maybe it belonged to a neighbor. Maybe it had always been there. Still, I couldn't remember mentioning where I lived. Not once. I checked every invoice I'd ever sent. No address. Only my name and email. My portfolio website listed no personal information. Social media? Private. Freelance profile? No address there either. I told myself they had probably guessed. Maybe they'd looked me up somehow. Maybe there was a public record I'd forgotten about. There had to be an explanation. There always is. Isn't there? I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked the account. For the first time in weeks, silence. I remember feeling relieved, embarrassed even. I'd allowed my imagination to get carried away. Someone had played a stupid joke. That was all. I went shopping that afternoon. Nothing unusual happened. I cooked dinner, watched television. By midnight, I'd almost forgotten the whole thing. The next morning, I opened my front door to collect a parcel. There was an envelope, no stamp, no address, just my first name written neatly across the front. Inside was a printed copy of one of the logos I'd designed for that anonymous client. Across the back, someone had written a single sentence in black ink. "You forgot to send the source files." I didn't tell anyone. I should have. Instead, I convinced myself somebody was trying to frighten me. Perhaps another freelancer. Perhaps someone who knew where I lived. The human brain is remarkably good at inventing ordinary explanations for extraordinary things. Anything to avoid admitting we have no idea what's happening. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. They lived about 40 minutes away. I didn't mention the envelope. I laughed, watched a film with them, stayed until nearly 11 before driving home. Halfway back, my phone buzzed. It was an email. No subject line, no sender name, just an attachment. I didn't open it until I reached home. The attachment contained a single photograph. My parents' house, taken that evening. From across the street, the timestamp in the corner matched the exact time we'd been eating dinner. At first, I assumed someone had followed me. Then I noticed something that made my hands go cold. The photograph wasn't taken from the road. It had been taken through the upstairs bedroom window of the empty house opposite. That house had been abandoned for almost 3 years. I knew because my parents mentioned it every time I visited. Nobody had lived there since the owner passed away. At least, nobody was supposed to. I left before sunrise the next morning. Not because I thought someone was watching the house, because I didn't want to find out. I threw a few clothes into a backpack, grabbed my laptop, and drove to a hotel nearly 2 hours away. Somewhere I'd never stayed before. Somewhere I'd never posted about online. The receptionist handed me a key card without saying much. Within 10 minutes, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, convincing myself I'd overreacted. People get strange messages every day: scams, threats, pranks. The internet is full of people trying to scare strangers for their own amusement. That had to be all this was. I opened my laptop and began changing passwords: email, banking, cloud storage, anything I could think of. Nothing looked suspicious, no unfamiliar logins, no strange devices. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. Private number. I ignored it. It rang again, then again. 5 calls in less than 10 minutes. Eventually, I answered. Nobody spoke. There wasn't even breathing, just a low electrical humming. The kind of sound you hear when an old television is left on in an empty room. After about 15 seconds, the line disconnected. No number, no voicemail, nothing. I switched my phone off completely. For the first time since all of this had started, I felt genuinely alone. No notifications, no emails, no messages, just silence. I tried to enjoy it. I went for a walk through the nearby town, bought a sandwich, sat beside the river for an hour and watched people go about their day. Families, students, dog walkers, normal life. It was strangely comforting. By the evening, I'd almost convinced myself that leaving home had solved whatever this was. Then I returned to the hotel. The room had been cleaned, fresh towels, bed made. The television remote had been placed neatly on the bedside table. There was also something that definitely hadn't been there when I left: a black envelope. No writing, no logo, just plain black paper. Inside was a memory stick. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. I walked straight back downstairs. The receptionist looked confused when I asked who had entered my room. She checked her computer. Only housekeeping. I asked if anyone had left an envelope. She shook her head. No. I showed her the black envelope. She stared at it for a moment. I've never seen that before. I asked if they had security cameras covering the corridor. They do. Can we check them? She hesitated before calling the manager. It took nearly 20 minutes before he arrived. Together, we watched the footage. Housekeeping entered just after midday. They cleaned the room. Left 8 minutes later. Nobody else entered. Not a single person. The timestamp continued uninterrupted until I returned that evening. The envelope had somehow appeared inside a room that nobody had entered. The manager apologized repeatedly, said perhaps one of the staff had forgotten they'd been inside. But I could see from his face that he didn't believe his own explanation. Neither did I. I took the memory stick back upstairs. I stared at it for almost an hour before plugging it into my laptop. There was only one file, no file name, no extension, just a long string of numbers. I clicked it. It wasn't a document. It wasn't a video. It was a recording from what looked like a security camera. At first, I didn't recognize the location. Then I realized what I was looking at. It was my home office. The camera was positioned somewhere near the ceiling, looking directly at my desk. The recording lasted nearly 6 hours. It showed me working on the client's designs the week before. Only I had never owned a camera. I left before sunrise the next morning. Not because I thought someone was watching the house, because I didn't want to find out. I threw a few clothes into a backpack, grabbed my laptop, and drove to a hotel nearly 2 hours away. Somewhere I'd never stayed before. Somewhere I'd never posted about online. The receptionist handed me a key card without saying much. Within 10 minutes, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, convincing myself I'd overreacted. People get strange messages every day: scams, threats, pranks. The internet is full of people trying to scare strangers for their own amusement. That had to be all this was. I opened my laptop and began changing passwords: email, banking, cloud storage, anything I could think of. Nothing looked suspicious. No unfamiliar logins, no strange devices. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. Private number. I ignored it. It rang again, then again. 5 calls in less than 10 minutes. Eventually, I answered. Nobody spoke. There wasn't even breathing, just a low electrical humming. The kind of sound you hear when an old television is left on in an empty room. After about 15 seconds, the line disconnected. No number, no voicemail, nothing. I switched my phone off completely. For the first time since all of this had started, I felt genuinely alone. No notifications, no emails, no messages, just silence. I tried to enjoy it. I went for a walk through the nearby town, bought a sandwich, sat beside the river for an hour, and watched people go about their day. families, students, dog walkers, normal life. It was strangely comforting. By the evening, I'd almost convinced myself that leaving home had solved whatever this was. Then I returned to the hotel. The room had been cleaned, fresh towels, bed made. The television remote had been placed neatly on the bedside table. There was also something that definitely hadn't been there when I left, a black envelope. No writing, no logo, just plain black paper. Inside was a memory stick, nothing else. No note, no explanation. I walked straight back downstairs. The receptionist looked confused when I asked who had entered my room. She checked her computer. Only housekeeping. I asked if anyone had left an envelope. She shook her head. No. I showed her the black envelope. She stared at it for a moment. I've never seen that before. I asked if they had security cameras covering the corridor. They do. Can we check them? She hesitated before calling the manager. It took nearly 20 minutes before he arrived. Together we watched the footage. Housekeeping entered just after midday. They cleaned the room, left 8 minutes later. Nobody else entered. Not a single person. The timestamp continued uninterrupted until I returned that evening. The envelope had somehow appeared inside a room that nobody had entered. The manager apologized repeatedly. He suggested that perhaps a member of staff had forgotten they'd gone in, but I could see from his face that he didn't believe his own explanation. Neither did I. I took the memory stick back upstairs. I stared at it for almost an hour before plugging it into my laptop. There was only one file. No file name, no extension, just a long string of numbers. I clicked it. It wasn't a document. It wasn't a video file I recognized. It simply opened and started playing. The picture came into focus slowly. A room. My home office. The camera was mounted high in the corner, looking down at my desk. I froze. I had never installed a camera there. The recording lasted almost 6 hours. At first, everything looked normal. I answered emails, made coffee, worked on the client's designs. Every movement matched what I remembered. Then something happened that I couldn't explain. The version of me on the screen suddenly stopped typing. He turned his head towards the hallway. Not a quick glance. He stared, completely motionless, almost as if he'd heard someone. After nearly a minute, he stood up and walked out of the room. The office was empty. 30 seconds passed, then a minute, then almost 2. Nothing happened. I almost closed the recording. Then someone walked into frame. It wasn't me. A man I'd never seen before wandered into my office as though he'd been there dozens of times. He wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't appear to be hiding. He simply sat in my chair and began looking through the papers on my desk. He picked up a notebook, leafed through it, opened one of the drawers. Then he smiled. Not at the room, not at me, directly at the camera, as though he knew someone would eventually watch this recording. He stood up and walked away. A few seconds later, I returned carrying a mug of coffee. I sat back down and continued working, completely unaware that anyone had supposedly been inside my house. I replayed the footage, again and again. The stranger appeared every time, always in exactly the same place, always smiling at the camera. I shut the laptop. My first instinct was that the recording had been edited. It had to be. But the more I thought about it, the less sense that made. If someone wanted to frighten me, why not make the stranger stand behind me? Why have him wave at the camera? Why hide him while I was out of the room? It felt less like a threat and more like proof. Proof that someone wanted me to know they could enter my house without me ever noticing. I drove home early the following morning. I don't really know why. Part of me wanted to prove the recording was fake. The other part wanted to find the camera. I searched the house from top to bottom. Smoke alarms, bookshelves, power sockets, picture frames, the back of the television, even inside the air vents. Nothing. No hidden cameras, no microphones, no signs that anyone had forced their way inside. By late afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself the recording had been fabricated. Then I noticed something I'd somehow missed before. One of the drawers in my desk wasn't fully closed. It was only open by an inch or two, the sort of thing you normally wouldn't notice. I pulled it open. Inside were exactly what I expected. Old notebooks, spare hard drives, my passport, a handful of USB cables I'd forgotten I owned. Everything looked normal. Until I picked up one of the notebooks. It felt heavier than I remembered. I opened it. About halfway through, a folded sheet of paper slipped onto the floor. It definitely wasn't mine. I unfolded it carefully. It was a printed floor plan of my house. Every room had been labeled. Measurements were written beside each wall. Red circles marked every window. Blue arrows marked every door. Someone had even made notes about which floorboards creaked and which stairs made noise. Across the top of the page, in neat black lettering, were 4 words: confirmed, easy internal access. I don't think I've ever felt fear like that before. Not panic, not the kind that makes you run. It was quieter than that, the sort of fear that settles into your stomach and refuses to leave. I called the police. I told them someone had been sending anonymous messages. I mentioned the envelope, the floor plan, the strange phone calls. I left out the recording. I knew how it sounded. A video showing a stranger walking around my house while I somehow failed to notice him wasn't something I could expect anyone to believe. The officer who arrived listened carefully. He photographed everything, asked sensible questions, checked the doors and windows for signs of forced entry. Before he left, he asked the one question I couldn't answer. "Do you know who might want to do this?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because I realized I knew almost nothing about the person I'd been working for. No name, no business, no address, not even a phone number, just a chat window and a bank transfer. The officer suggested changing the locks, installing security cameras, and staying somewhere else for a few days. It was good advice, practical advice, the kind of advice that assumes the person watching you is limited by locked doors. The locksmith arrived the next morning. By lunchtime, every lock in the house had been replaced. That afternoon, I installed 2 security cameras myself. One overlooked the driveway, the other covered the back garden. I tested both of them several times. The picture was clear. The motion alerts worked perfectly. For the first time in days, I felt as though I had some control again. That feeling lasted until 3:17 the following morning. My phone vibrated on the bedside table. Motion detected. Front camera. Still half asleep, I opened the live feed. The driveway was empty. No people, no cars, nothing. I assumed a fox had wandered past. Then another alert appeared. Motion detected. Back camera. Again, nothing. The garden was completely still. Over the next 10 minutes, my phone filled with notifications. Front camera, back camera, front camera, back camera. Every 30 seconds, every recording showed exactly the same thing, an empty property. Eventually, I silenced the notifications and forced myself back to sleep. I told myself I'd figure it out in the morning. I just didn't realize how strange those recordings really were. The first thing I did after making coffee was sit down and watch every recording from the night before. At first, they looked exactly as I remembered. An empty driveway, an empty garden, trees moving slightly in the wind, nothing more. I was about to delete them all when I noticed something odd. Each recording was supposed to last 30 seconds. According to the timestamps, they only lasted 29. Exactly 29. Every single clip. I frowned. It had to be some kind of software bug. Curiosity got the better of me. I imported every clip into my editing software and placed them one after another on a timeline. Sure enough, there was a tiny gap between each recording, exactly 1 second. A second that had somehow vanished. I exported the footage frame by frame, hoping I might find a clue. Most of the images were identical. Driveway, fence, street, garden, over and over again. Then I stopped. One image hadn't appeared in the video. Someone was standing directly in front of the driveway camera, so close that their face filled almost the entire frame. The picture was blurred, but I could make out the outline of a hood and what looked like a smile. The next frame showed an empty driveway again. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. I tried replaying the recording. The figure wasn't there. Only the exported frame revealed it, almost as if it wasn't supposed to be seen. I spent the rest of the morning trying to convince myself the software had glitched. It wasn't impossible, just unlikely. Around midday, my phone rang. It was the police. They'd finished examining the envelope and the floor plan. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing useful. Before hanging up, the officer asked if I'd recovered the messages from my client. I checked again. The conversation was gone, not hidden, completely gone. Every payment was still in my account. Every design file was still on my computer, but there was no trace I'd ever spoken to them. "If anything else happens," the officer said, "call us straight away." I promised I would. About an hour later, an email arrived. No sender, no subject. just one attachment. I opened it. It was a photograph of my office. I was sitting at my desk. The timestamp matched the exact minute I opened the email. Someone had taken the picture moments earlier. I jumped up so quickly, I knocked my chair over. I pulled the front door open and ran into the street. There were no cars, no people, just the usual sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barking somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower a few streets away. Nothing that suggested someone had been standing outside my window seconds earlier. I walked the length of the road twice, checked between parked cars, looked down the alley beside my house. Nothing. When I got back inside, another email had arrived. No attachment this time. Just 6 words. You're always looking too late. I didn't reply. Instead, I shut the laptop and unplugged my internet router. It sounds ridiculous now, but I convinced myself that if I disconnected everything, whoever was doing this would lose interest. For the rest of the afternoon, the house was silent. No emails, no phone calls, no notifications. By evening, I almost felt embarrassed by my own paranoia. Then I noticed the router lights blinking. They shouldn't have been. The power cable was lying on the floor. I picked the router up. Every light was flashing as though it were connected. I unplugged every cable. The lights stayed on. I even carried it into the kitchen and placed it on the worktop. Still flashing. No power, no internet, no reason for it to be alive. About 30 seconds later, they all stopped at once. My phone vibrated. Despite having no internet connection, one new message, unknown sender. It contained only a single sentence. We preferred it when you were working. The message stayed on my screen for less than a minute before disappearing. Not deleted. It simply faded away as though it had never been there. When I checked my messages, there was nothing new. No unknown number, no notification history, nothing. I unplugged my computer, switched my phone off, and drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't tell them what was happening. I couldn't. How do you explain something that doesn't make sense to you? I stayed for dinner, pretended everything was normal, laughed at the right moments. The entire time I kept glancing towards the windows. I don't think anyone noticed. On the drive home, I made a decision. I was done running. If this all started with that client, then that was where I needed to start looking. The next morning, I powered up an old laptop I hadn't used in years. It still had copies of almost everything I'd ever worked on. Old invoices, archived emails, backups. I searched for the company name. Nothing. I searched for the file names they'd sent me. Nothing. Then I searched the payment references. Most were meaningless strings of letters and numbers. One stood out. It wasn't a company name. It was a username. I searched it online. Nothing at first. Then, buried several pages deep, I found an old discussion on a tiny design forum. Someone had asked a simple question. Has anyone worked for this client? There were only 4 replies. The first said the payments were excellent. The second said they stopped receiving work after a few weeks. The third simply read, "Don't send source files." The final reply was posted almost 3 years later. There was no profile picture, no signature, just one sentence. If they ask for revisions after the final payment, walk away. That was the end of the thread. Every account that had replied had been deleted. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time, I realized I probably wasn't the first person this had happened to. I just might have been the first person to keep asking questions. I spent the rest of that afternoon searching for the usernames from the thread. Most of them had disappeared completely. No social media, no portfolios, no websites. It was as though they had simply stopped existing online. Eventually, I found one. Not an active account. An old portfolio that had never been taken down. It belonged to a designer named Daniel. The last update was almost 6 years old. His contact page still listed an email address. On the off chance it still worked, I sent a message. I didn't expect a reply. Less than 10 minutes later, I got one. It contained only 2 words. Call me. There was a phone number underneath. I dialed it immediately. The line connected after the first ring. Nobody spoke. For a few seconds, all I could hear was faint static. Then a man quietly asked, "Did they ask for the source files?" My mouth went dry. Yes. There was a long silence. I knew it. "Who are they?" I asked. "I don't know. You worked for them? Years ago." "What happened?" he sighed. "Nothing at first." He told me the story sounded almost identical to mine. Easy jobs, good money, simple edits. then strange requests, then messages that proved they knew where he lived. I went to the police, he said. They couldn't find anything. Did it stop? Eventually. Another long silence. I gave them what they wanted. The source files? No. What then? I stopped looking. I frowned. I don't understand. You will. Before I could ask another question, he said something that has stayed with me ever since. The designs aren't the product. They're the invitation. The line went dead. I called him back immediately. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. The number was disconnected. Not busy, not unavailable. Disconnected. I checked the email he'd replied from. It had vanished from my inbox. Even the message I'd sent was gone. I searched every folder. Nothing. It was becoming a pattern. Anything that might have answered my questions disappeared almost as soon as I found it. I couldn't let it go. The sentence kept replaying in my head. The designs aren't the product. They're the invitation. I opened the folder containing every file I'd made for the client. There were dozens of them. Logos, icons, buttons, background images. I'd looked at them individually hundreds of times. I'd never looked at them together. So I arranged them all on one large digital canvas. At first, it looked like a random collection of branding work. Different colors, different layouts, different fonts. Then I started moving them around. Not because I expected anything to happen, simply because I was trying to spot a pattern. One logo seemed to fit perfectly beside another. A set of icons lined up into neat rows. The background image filled a gap I hadn't noticed before. After almost an hour, I leaned back in my chair. The collection no longer looked random. Together they formed something else. It looked like a map, not a street map, more like the floor plan of a large building. The icons sat exactly where doors might be. The buttons marked corridors. The logo I'd designed first was positioned in the very center. I laughed to myself. I'd been staring at design files for so long that my brain was inventing patterns. Then my phone rang. It was the locksmith. "I think I've got the wrong house," he said. "What do you mean? You asked me to come back today." "I didn't." "You definitely did. Someone called yesterday, gave your name and address." "I never made that call." There was a pause. "They knew the new lock code," he said quietly. My heart sank. I hadn't told anyone the code, not even my parents. The locksmith canceled the visit immediately and suggested changing everything again. As we ended the call, I slowly turned back towards my computer. The map I'd accidentally assembled was still on the screen. For the first time, I noticed tiny numbers hidden inside the artwork. Coordinates, not design measurements, map coordinates. And every single one pointed to a different place in the city where I lived. I spent the next hour checking every coordinate. I expected them to be meaningless, random locations, some kind of coincidence, anything that would allow me to convince myself I was wrong. But they weren't random. They were real places. A storage unit, an empty office building, a small apartment block, a closed-down shop. Places that looked completely ordinary. That was the part that bothered me most. Nothing about them looked suspicious. If I had walked past any of them, I would never have given them a second thought. I opened a map and looked at them together. They formed a route, a path through the city. And at the end of that path was the address of the first building I'd ever designed a logo for. I stared at the screen. I had never been given an address. The client had never mentioned a location. They had only sent images, screenshots, files, instructions. Yet somehow, without realizing it, I had created the identity for a network of locations. The thought made me feel sick, not because I understood what it meant, because I didn't. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation. Maybe they were offices. Maybe they were warehouses. Maybe I had connected unrelated things and convinced myself there was a pattern. I needed proof. So I drove to the closest location, a small office building on the edge of an industrial estate. Nothing about it stood out. Gray walls, dirty windows, a faded sign above the entrance. It looked abandoned. I sat across the road for nearly 20 minutes. I felt ridiculous, like someone from a conspiracy documentary. Then a man arrived. He walked up to the entrance and entered a code. The door opened. I couldn't see the keypad clearly, but I noticed something. The symbol beside the entrance, a small white mark on a black background. My stomach dropped. It was the first logo I had created for the client. The one I thought was just a meaningless design. The man disappeared inside. I stayed in my car, I don't know how long. Eventually, another person arrived, then another. None of them looked suspicious. That almost made it worse. They looked like normal people. Someone carrying a laptop bag, someone wearing a delivery uniform, someone holding a coffee. They entered the building using the same symbol I had designed. I drove home without leaving the car. That night I deleted every file, every email, every payment record, every design. I wiped the hard drive, I wanted it gone. Whatever I had become involved in, I wanted no connection to it. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had finally done something right. Then, just before midnight, my doorbell camera sent me an alert. Someone was at the front door. I opened the live feed. Nobody was standing there. But something had been left on the doorstep. A small envelope. This time it wasn't black. It was white. And written across the front were 3 words. Thank you, designer. I didn't open the envelope. Not immediately. I stood there staring at it through the camera feed for almost 10 minutes. A part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it. If I didn't touch it, maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it was just another attempt to get inside my head. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. They already knew where I lived. They already knew what I was doing. Leaving the envelope unopened wouldn't change anything. Eventually, I stepped outside. The street was empty. No cars, no people, no movement. Just a quiet residential street at midnight. I picked up the envelope using gloves from the kitchen and brought it inside. There was a single piece of paper inside. No threats, no warnings, just a message. We know you understand now. I read it several times. Then I turned the page over. Nothing. No signature, no explanation, just those 7 words. I almost threw it away. Instead, I placed it beside my computer. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity had replaced fear by that point. Maybe I wanted answers more than I wanted safety. The following morning, I searched for the symbol again. Not the company name, not the username, the symbol. I used image searches, old forums, archived pages, anything I could find. For hours, nothing appeared. Then, buried on an old discussion board, I found a post from someone asking about the exact same logo. The post was nearly 10 years old. The replies had been deleted. Except for one. A user had written, "Don't ask what it means, ask why you were shown it." I clicked the username. The account no longer existed. I searched the phrase. Nothing. It was as if the entire conversation had been removed, except for that one sentence. That was when I noticed something strange. The date of the post. It was from before I had ever created the logo, before I had even started designing professionally. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to find some mistake. There had to be one. Maybe the date was wrong. Maybe the archive was inaccurate. Maybe I was looking at something completely unrelated. Then I noticed the username attached to the post. It was familiar, not because I had seen it online, because I had seen it before. On one of the screenshots the client sent me, it was one of the usernames listed on that hidden marketplace page. The page I was never supposed to see. The page I had only glimpsed for a second. I closed the browser. I couldn't explain what I had found, but one thing was becoming clear. The client hadn't randomly discovered me. They hadn't searched for a designer. They had chosen me. The question was why. I spent the next few days trying to find out why. That question became impossible to ignore. Why me? Why a small-time designer working from a spare room? There were thousands of people who could have done the same work. Better designers, more experienced designers, people who would have noticed things I missed, but they chose me. I started looking through every conversation I'd ever had with the client. Most of it was gone, deleted, lost, but I still had some of the original files they'd sent me. Images, instructions, reference material, things I had never thought twice about. I opened them one by one. At first, nothing stood out, just ordinary design requests. Change this color, move this icon, make this smaller. Then I noticed something. Every file contained hidden information, not visible on the image itself. Metadata, dates, author names, software versions. Most of it was meaningless, except one detail. The original files weren't new. Some of them were years old. The client hadn't created them recently. They had been passed between different people for a long time. I checked the oldest file. It had been created almost 11 years earlier. That was impossible. The client who contacted me had only existed online for a few months, at least according to everything I could find. I opened another. Same thing. Another. Same. These weren't new projects. They were old projects being updated. I suddenly remembered something Daniel had said. The designs aren't the product. They're the invitation. I looked at the files differently after that. The colors, the symbols, the layouts. They weren't branding. They were instructions. A way for people who already knew what they were looking for to recognize something. I went back to the marketplace screenshot, the one I'd accidentally uncovered. I searched through the blurred sections, not the listings, the small details, the icons, the symbols, the things I had ignored. Then I found it, my logo. Not exactly the same, but close enough. It had been used before I ever designed it. My version wasn't the original. It was a copy, a cleaner version, a modern version. I had unknowingly recreated something that already existed. That was the moment I stopped thinking about this as a job gone wrong. This wasn't about a client. It wasn't about money. I hadn't been hired to create something. I had been hired to make something old look new, and whoever was behind it had chosen me because I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in front of my computer until sunrise, searching for anything connected to the symbol. The more I looked, the more I realized how carefully hidden everything was. There were no obvious websites, no social media accounts, no news articles, nothing that would appear in a normal search. It existed in the spaces between things. Old forum posts, deleted pages, archived images, forgotten conversations, the kind of information that disappears unless someone is specifically looking for it. Eventually, I found another reference, a post from someone claiming they had worked for the same group. It was only a few sentences long. I was asked to create designs. I thought it was just branding. I was wrong. The post ended there. No explanation, no details, just those 3 lines. The account had been deleted years earlier, but one reply remained, a single question. Did they ever contact you again? Underneath was a response from the original poster. Yes. That's when I realized the first job wasn't the job. I read that sentence over and over. The first job wasn't the job. It sounded exactly like what had happened to me. The logos, the icons, the edits. They weren't the purpose. They were a test. They wanted to see who would notice, who would investigate, who would keep digging. And I had done exactly that. I had followed every clue they left behind. I had searched. I had connected things. I had found locations. I had become interested. The thought made me feel sick, because I realized something. Maybe they weren't trying to hide from me. Maybe they wanted me to find them. That afternoon, I received another message. Not an email, not a text. A notification from an old account I hadn't used in years. A freelance profile I had completely forgotten about. The account was inactive. The password hadn't been changed, yet there was a new message waiting. I opened it. It was from the same username that had first contacted me. The message contained a link, no explanation, just the words, "You've earned access." I stared at the screen. Every instinct told me not to click it. I closed the browser, walked away, made coffee, tried to convince myself I was done. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when someone knows exactly how to use it against you. 20 minutes later, I was back at the computer. The message was still there, waiting. I clicked the link. The page that opened wasn't what I expected. No strange graphics, no hidden marketplace, no mysterious messages, just a simple login screen. At the top was the symbol, my symbol, the one I thought I had created. Below it was a single sentence, "Welcome back." And underneath, a username field, already filled in, with my name. I didn't type anything. I couldn't. I just stared at the screen. My name sat inside the username field as if the website had been waiting for me to arrive. Not my email address, not my account name, my actual name, the one I rarely used online, the one that wasn't connected to any of my freelance profiles. I closed the browser, immediately. Then I opened it again. The page was gone. Instead, I was looking at a blank error screen. No website, no symbol, nothing. I sat there for several minutes, trying to decide whether I had imagined it. That was becoming the hardest part of the entire experience, not knowing what was real, the messages, the photographs, the recordings. Every time something impossible happened, there was just enough uncertainty for me to question myself. Maybe the website had been fake. Maybe someone had hacked my computer. Maybe I was simply exhausted and making connections that weren't there. But then my phone buzzed. One new email. This time it came from an address. A real address. Not hidden, not anonymous. It belonged to me. The email had been sent from my own account. The subject line said, "Your first assignment." I felt a wave of nausea. I checked my sent folder. The email was there, timestamped 10 minutes earlier, sent from my account, but I hadn't written it. The message contained a single image. It was a photograph of my old home office. The same room from the security recording. Except this time, there was something different. A person was sitting at my desk, facing away from the camera, wearing a dark jacket. I zoomed in. The quality was terrible, but I could make out enough. It was me, not someone who looked like me, not someone wearing similar clothes. Me, sitting in my chair at my desk, looking at a screen. The timestamp on the image was from 3 days earlier. I hadn't been home 3 days earlier. I had been at the hotel. I checked my phone records, checked my bank transactions, checked the messages I'd sent. I had proof that I was somewhere else. Yet there I was, inside my own house, doing something I couldn't remember. I didn't know what scared me more, the possibility that someone had created a fake image, or the possibility that they hadn't. Another message arrived. This one was not an email. It appeared as a notification on the hidden website. The website that was supposedly gone. It said, "You are asking the wrong question." I stared at the words. Then another line appeared. "Stop asking who we are." A pause. Then, "Ask what you already agreed to." I felt cold, because I knew exactly what they meant. The contracts, the payments, the files. Every time I accepted a job, I had clicked through terms and conditions without reading them. Nobody ever reads them. Not really. I opened the folder containing my invoices. For the first time, I looked closely at the agreements. Buried beneath pages of ordinary legal wording was a section I had never noticed. A clause about the use of submitted designs. A clause allowing the client to modify, reproduce, and distribute completed work. I had signed it. I had agreed to it. The designs were mine, but they also belonged to them. And suddenly I understood. They didn't need to hack my computer. They didn't need to break into my house. I had opened the door myself. I spent the next few hours reading every contract I had ever signed. Most of them were standard. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain what was happening. Then I found the one. The first agreement I had accepted from the anonymous client. It looked normal at first. The same kind of document freelancers accept every day. Payment terms, usage rights, confidentiality agreements. Nothing that would make anyone suspicious. But near the bottom was a section that had been added separately, not part of the main contract. A small paragraph under an additional permissions heading. It said the client could use completed materials for internal identification, verification, and operational purposes. Operational purposes. Those two words kept appearing in my head, because nobody hires a graphic designer to create something for operational purposes. They hire a designer for marketing, branding, advertising, things people can see. This wasn't about making something visible. It was about making something recognizable. I closed the document. For the first time, I felt certain about one thing. The work itself wasn't illegal. The designs weren't dangerous. The people using them were. And somehow I had helped them. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but I had helped. That realization bothered me more than anything else. I had always imagined getting involved in something like this would happen dramatically. Someone would force you, threaten you, make you choose. The reality was much quieter. It was an email, a payment, a simple request, a button that said accept. That was all it took. That evening I decided I was going to expose everything. I copied every file I had left, every message, every screenshot, every piece of evidence. I created backups on 3 different drives. I sent copies to myself. I sent copies to a secure account. I even printed some of the most important pages. I thought if enough copies existed, they couldn't erase everything. I was wrong. At 2:12 in the morning, my computer restarted. No warning, no update notification. It simply turned off. When it came back on, every folder I had created was empty, not deleted, empty. The names were still there, the files were gone. I checked my external drives. Same thing. The folders existed. The contents didn't. I checked my email. The messages I'd sent myself had vanished. The attachments were gone. I checked the cloud storage. Nothing. It was impossible. Not because someone couldn't delete files, they could, but because they had removed only the things connected to them. My personal files were untouched. Photos, documents, old projects, everything remained. Only their files had disappeared. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. This time, someone spoke. A man's voice. Calm. Almost friendly. You should stop trying to fix something you don't understand. I didn't say anything. Who are you? A pause. Then someone who has been where you are. Daniel. The line went silent. I knew immediately I'd guessed correctly. How do you know that name? He asked. The question made my stomach drop. Because I hadn't said his name. Not once. Not during the phone call. Not in any message. I had only thought it. I hung up. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. A message arrived seconds later. It contained one sentence. Daniel tried to help too. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the dark with my phone switched off, staring at the front door. I kept thinking about Daniel, the way he spoke, the warning in his voice, the fact that whoever these people were, they knew exactly who he was. And now, they knew I had spoken to him. The next morning I made a decision. I wasn't going to investigate anymore. Not because I wasn't curious, because I finally understood something. Every question I asked gave them another opportunity to respond. Every time I searched, they knew. Every time I clicked something, they were waiting. I had been treating it like a puzzle, but I wasn't solving a puzzle. I was playing a game where someone else controlled the rules. I packed a bag and left. No announcement, no messages, no goodbye. I drove to a small town several hours away and checked into a hotel under a different name. I paid in cash. I left my phone switched off. For the first time in weeks, I felt invisible. That feeling lasted until I walked into the hotel room. There was a laptop sitting on the desk, not mine. I hadn't noticed it when I entered. I stared at it for a long time. Then I checked the room, the bathroom, the wardrobe, under the bed. Nobody. The laptop was closed, waiting. I should have left it alone. I know that. But by then, curiosity had become something I couldn't control. I opened it. There was no password. The desktop contained one folder, my name. Inside were dozens of files, photographs, documents, notes, everything about me. Not just my work, everything. My childhood home, my old schools, places I'd worked, friends I hadn't spoken to in years, photos that had never been uploaded online. I felt sick. The amount of information wasn't the frightening part. The frightening part was how ordinary it looked. There was no dramatic secret database. No movie-style hacking screen. Just a collection of information someone had slowly gathered over time. The same way anyone might collect photos for a family album. Except this wasn't a family album, it was an investigation. At the bottom of the folder was one final file, a video. I clicked it. It showed me. Not a recording of my office, not a photograph, a real video. I was sitting at my desk working, but this time I remembered it. The date was from months before I ever met the client. I watched myself designing something I had completely forgotten about, a logo, the same symbol, the exact same symbol. I stopped breathing because I suddenly remembered I had seen it before, years earlier, before the anonymous client, before the payments, before everything. I had designed that symbol once before, not for them, for someone else, a normal client, a project I had forgotten, a project I had deleted. But they hadn't forgotten. The video ended. A final message appeared on the screen. You were never selected. A pause, then another line. You were recognized. I watched that message until the screen went dark. You were never selected. You were recognized. Those words changed everything. Because until that moment, I had believed this had started with the anonymous client. The first message, the first payment, the first strange request. But maybe that wasn't the beginning. Maybe that was just the moment they decided to contact me. I searched through the files again. This time I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for a timeline. The first mention of my name. The first time they had found me. The first time they had watched me. I found it buried in a folder labeled with a date from nearly 7 years earlier. Inside was a screenshot of a design portfolio, my old portfolio, the one I had used when I was just starting out. There was a single image highlighted, a logo concept I had created for a university project. I had never sold it, never published it, never used it again. I barely remembered making it. But there it was, the same symbol, not identical, rougher, less polished, but unmistakably the same. Underneath the image was a note, Pattern confirmed. That was the moment I realized something. They hadn't hired me because I was good. They hadn't found me because I was available. They had been watching my work for years, waiting for me to create something that matched what they needed. The question was, why? I closed the laptop. I didn't want any more answers. Every answer I found only created more questions. I left the hotel immediately. I drove without a destination. I just wanted distance. Distance from the laptop. Distance from my house. Distance from anything connected to the client. Eventually, I stopped at a petrol station. I sat there for nearly an hour. People came and went. Nobody looked at me. Nobody approached me. For the first time in a long time, I felt normal. Then I noticed something on the wall behind the counter. A small poster advertising a local business. Nothing unusual, except the logo in the corner. I froze. It was the symbol. My symbol. The same one. Not a variation, not something similar. The exact design. I walked closer. The cashier looked at me strangely. "Can I help you?" I pointed at the logo. "Where did this come from?" He shrugged. "I don't know, it's just their branding." "Whose branding?" He looked at the poster. "The company that owns the building." "What company?" He glanced at the sign, then looked back at me. "The name's been there for years." I took a photograph of the poster. When I checked it later, the image was corrupted. Not blurry, not damaged. The entire logo section was just missing, like someone had removed it from the picture. I drove the rest of the way home feeling completely defeated, because I finally understood the scale of what I was dealing with. This wasn't one website, one group, one client. The symbol wasn't a password, it wasn't an identifier, it was everywhere, and somehow I had been helping create it. When I got home, I didn't go inside immediately. I sat in the driveway for almost an hour. The house looked exactly the same as it always had, the same windows, the same front door, the same curtains. That was the strangest part. Nothing about my life looked different, but I felt like I was seeing it from the outside, like I was looking at someone else's house, someone else's life. Eventually I went inside. I expected something to have changed. A note, a message, another envelope. Anything, but there was nothing. The house was completely silent. For the first time in weeks, nobody seemed to be watching. I walked into my office and turned on my computer. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe I wanted proof that everything was over. Maybe I wanted to find something I had missed. Instead, I found a new folder on my desktop. I hadn't created it. The name was simple, Final. Inside was one document, a text file. No password, no hidden message, just a few paragraphs. The first line read, "We apologize for the inconvenience." I almost laughed. After everything that had happened, that was the opening sentence. An apology. The message continued. It explained nothing about who they were, nothing about the network, nothing about the locations. Instead, it explained why they had contacted me. They claimed they were not interested in me personally. They were interested in my ability to recognize patterns, my design style, the way I naturally repeated shapes and layouts, the way I noticed symmetry without thinking. According to the message, most people create randomly. They don't see connections. They don't notice repetition. But some people do, and those people are valuable. I read that paragraph several times because it was almost insulting. They weren't saying I was special. They were saying I was useful. The next part explained the work, the logos, the icons, the images. They claimed everything I created was harmless. The problem was how other people interpreted it. A symbol only has meaning to those who understand it. To everyone else, it was just a logo, a design, a decoration. But to certain people, it meant something completely different. I stopped reading because I realized what they were trying to say. They didn't need me to understand. In fact, they preferred that I didn't. The less I knew, the less dangerous I was. The final paragraph was only one sentence. "We recommend you return to your previous life." That was it. No threat, no warning, no demand, just a suggestion. I closed the document, and for the first time since this began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. Not because I trusted them. I didn't. But because maybe they were finally finished. Maybe this was their way of ending it. I deleted the folder. Then I deleted it from the recycling bin. I shut down the computer, and I walked away. For the next few months, nothing happened. No messages, no strange emails, no photographs, no anonymous payments. Slowly, I started living normally again. I moved house, changed my phone number, stop taking anonymous freelance work. I told myself I had escaped. I almost believed it. Until 6 months later, when I saw the symbol again. And this time, it wasn't online. I was in a coffee shop on the other side of the country, a place I'd never visited before. That was important to me. After everything that happened, I had become careful. I didn't post where I went. I didn't share my location. I didn't tell people when I traveled. I had rebuilt my life around the idea of being invisible. The coffee shop was small, quiet, the kind of place where people sat with laptops and headphones for hours. I was waiting for my order when I noticed the wall behind the counter. There was a framed piece of artwork hanging there. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It was just abstract shapes, modern design, something chosen to make the place look more interesting. Then I saw it. A small symbol in the bottom corner, the same symbol, my symbol. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. I walked closer. I stared at it for several seconds. The person behind the counter noticed. "Nice, isn't it?" I turned around. "Who made this?" They shrugged. "I'm not sure. The owner changed the artwork last month." "Do you know the artist?" "No idea." I looked back at the picture. The symbol was subtle. Most people wouldn't notice it. That was the point. I took out my phone. Before I could take a photo, the screen went black. The battery had died. I knew it was fully charged. I had charged it that morning. I switched it back on. Everything worked normally, except the camera. Every time I opened it, the app closed immediately. I left the coffee shop without taking the picture. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was looking for patterns because I was afraid. That was probably true. The human brain wants explanations. When something frightening happens, we search for connections. Sometimes we create them. But later that evening, back at my hotel, I received an email. A normal email, from a normal address. No hidden sender. No strange attachments. It was from the owner of the coffee shop. I had never given them my email. The message was short. "Sorry about earlier. Some things are better left as they are." There was a photograph attached. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. It was a picture of the artwork, but this time the symbol was different. It wasn't the version I created. It was the original, the one from my university project, the one I had made years before anyone had ever contacted me. Below the image was a final message. "We were never interested in your designs. We were interested in where they came from." I sat there staring at the screen, because I finally understood the one thing I had been avoiding. They hadn't discovered my work. They hadn't copied my ideas. They hadn't found a useful designer. They had been searching for someone who would eventually create the symbol naturally. And somehow that person had been me. I never replied to that email. I didn't ask questions. I didn't demand answers. I didn't threaten to expose them. Because by then I understood something important. Answers were not what I needed. Answers were what they wanted me to chase. The entire time I had believed I was investigating them, but looking back, I think they were investigating me. Every search, every conversation, every attempt to understand what was happening, it all told them the same thing: how far I would go, how curious I was, how easily I could be guided. I deleted the email, then I deleted the account. I changed everything again. New phone, new email, new computer. I stopped using the name I had built my freelance career around. I stopped taking online work from strangers. For a while, I stopped designing completely. That was the hardest part. People think the scary part of something like this is the person following you, the threats, the strange messages, the feeling that someone is watching. But the worst part is what it does to your own mind. You stop trusting ordinary things: a logo on a shop window, a website, a random email, a stranger who knows your name. Everything becomes a possible clue. Everything becomes suspicious. Eventually, I moved on, or at least I learned how to live with it. I started working again, but only with people I met in person. No anonymous clients, no hidden profiles, no easy money. Life became normal. Years passed. I almost convinced myself the whole thing was behind me. Then one evening, I received a package. No return address, no sender, just my name. For a few minutes, I considered throwing it away. Instead, I opened it. Inside was a printed photograph. It showed my old home office, the one from the security footage, the one I hadn't lived in for years. The room was empty. No computer, no desk, no furniture, just an empty room. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note. Not a threat, not a warning, just a sentence. Thank you for helping us find it. I turned the photograph over again. I looked at the empty room. And then I noticed something. In the corner of the picture, barely visible on the wall, was a small mark, a symbol, not painted, not printed, carved into the wall. I stared at it for a long time, because I knew that mark. It was the same symbol, the same design, the same shape I had created years earlier, the one they claimed they had been searching for. I don't know what they found. I don't know what it means. And after everything that happened, I don't think I want to know. But there is one thing I have learned. People always say the internet remembers everything. They talk about old photos, old posts, old messages. They talk about digital footprints. But they rarely mention the things hiding underneath, the things nobody searches for, the things that wait quietly until someone notices them. I used to think the most dangerous thing about the internet was what people could find about you. Now I think the more frightening possibility is something else. What if the internet can find things about you before you even know they exist? I wish I could say that was the end. I wish I could tell you that after that final photograph, everything stopped, that I threw it away, forgot about it, and eventually moved on. But that wouldn't be true, because even now, years later, there are still small things that remind me it never really ended. Not in the way I expected. Nobody follows me. Nobody sends me messages. Nobody leaves envelopes outside my door. Nothing dramatic happens, and somehow that makes it worse, because dramatic things are easy to understand. A threat, a warning, a person standing outside your house. Those things tell you what you're dealing with. The things that stay hidden are much harder. Sometimes I see the symbol somewhere, not often. Just enough. A sticker on a street sign, a small mark on a website, a design on a package. Every time it happens, I tell myself the same thing. It's not the same. It's just a coincidence. Because that is the only way to keep living normally. You have to believe coincidences exist. You have to believe not everything is connected. Otherwise, you start seeing patterns everywhere. And maybe that's exactly what they wanted. Maybe the real test was never whether I could find them. Maybe the real test was whether I could stop looking. A few months ago, I received one final message. At least I hope it was the final one. It came from an email address I had never seen before. No name, no signature, just a blank message with a single attachment, a text file. Inside were only 3 sentences. We never needed you to understand. We only needed you to notice. Thank you for noticing. I deleted it immediately. I didn't search the email address. I didn't investigate the attachment. I didn't try to uncover another hidden meaning. For once, I did nothing. And that was the hardest thing I had ever done. Because curiosity had always been my weakness. It was what made me good at my job. It was what made me notice details other people missed. It was also what led me deeper into something I never should have found. Looking back, I don't think the people behind this were hackers in the way most people imagine. They weren't sitting in dark rooms trying to break into computers. They didn't need to. The internet is full of people who willingly open doors every day. People who click links, accept payments, agree to terms they don't read, share information without thinking. The easiest systems to access are often the ones people invite you into. And the scariest part is, I was one of those people. I opened the door myself. I just didn't know who was standing on the other side. For a long time, I wondered if I should tell anyone what happened. Friends, family, people who knew me. But every time I tried to explain it, I stopped. Not because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, because I was afraid they would. The internet has a strange way of making impossible things feel normal. A stranger knowing your location, a company knowing your personal information, a website knowing things about you before you tell it. People hear those things and shrug. They say that's just how the world works now, and maybe they're right. Maybe that's the most frightening part. We have become so used to being watched that we don't notice anymore. I used to think hacking was about someone sitting behind a computer trying to force their way into a system, breaking passwords, stealing files, finding weaknesses. But I learned something much simpler. The biggest weakness isn't technology. It's people. It's trust. It's curiosity. It's the part of us that wants to click the link, open the message, accept the opportunity. I think about that first payment sometimes, the one that started everything. At the time, it felt like luck, a random opportunity, easy money from a stranger online. I remember feeling proud. I remember telling myself I had finally found a way to make things easier. I never imagined that the first thing I created for them would follow me for years. The strange thing is, I still don't know if what happened to me was a warning or an invitation. Maybe they wanted me to walk away. Maybe they wanted me to keep digging. Maybe they wanted to see if someone like me would notice something hidden in plain sight. I don't know, and I don't think I'll ever know. A few weeks ago, I did something I promised myself I would never do again. I searched for the symbol. Just once. One search. That's all. I told myself I wasn't investigating. I was just checking. Of course, I knew that was a lie. The search results were almost empty. Nothing new, nothing strange, just the usual unrelated images and meaningless results. I was about to close the browser when one result appeared at the bottom of the page. A website I'd never seen before. No description, no title, just a blank page with a single image, the symbol. I stared at it. Then I noticed something underneath. A date. Not today's date. Not the date I created it. A date from years before I was born. I closed the laptop, and this time I didn't open it again. Because there are some things you can spend your entire life trying to understand. Some mysteries that feel impossible to leave alone. But sometimes the safest thing you can do is accept that you found something that was never meant to be found. I haven't searched for it since. I mean that. No more websites, no more forums, no more trying to connect the pieces. Because eventually I realized something that I wish I had understood at the beginning. Not every mystery is a puzzle waiting to be solved. Some things are hidden because they are dangerous, and some things are hidden because knowing the truth changes the way you see everything else. I still use the internet every day. I still buy things online. I still read articles, watch videos, and use websites without thinking twice. I haven't become paranoid, at least I don't think I have. But there are moments when I notice something small, a logo, a symbol, a strange phrase, and for a second I wonder. I wonder how many other people have seen the same things, how many people have ignored them, how many people have clicked accept without reading, how many people have created something without understanding what it would become. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about the internet. The internet isn't just a place where information exists. It's a place where information connects. Everything leaves a mark. Every account, every message, every photo, every file you upload, even things you think are gone. Sometimes those pieces come together into something you never intended to create, something bigger than yourself. That was my mistake. I thought I was creating designs. I thought I was making images. I thought I was helping a client build a brand. But maybe I was doing something else. Maybe I was adding one more piece to something that had already existed for years. Something that didn't need my permission. Something that didn't need me to understand. I still have one thing from that time. I kept the first payment. Not because I wanted the money. I don't even know why I kept it. Maybe part of me needed proof that it happened. That I didn't imagine it. That I wasn't losing my mind. It's saved in an old account I never use. Every year around the same date, I check it. Not because I want to, because I'm afraid that one day I'll open it and find something new. A message, a payment, a note, anything. So far, nothing has happened. But last month, I noticed something strange. The account history had changed. There was one additional transaction, no amount, no sender, no description, just a timestamp. The exact same date and time as the first payment I ever received. The one that started everything. I contacted the bank. They said there was no record of it. They said the account had never received anything unusual. They told me it was probably a display error, a glitch, a mistake. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was nothing. But then I noticed something else. The transaction reference. It wasn't a random string of numbers. It was a username. The same username that had contacted me years earlier. The same one that disappeared. The same one that should not have existed anymore. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the account, and I haven't checked it since, because after everything I've learned, I know better than anyone. Sometimes the scariest thing about finding something online is realizing that it found you first. That was the last time I looked. At least that's what I tell myself. Because the truth is, a part of me is still curious. I think that's the hardest thing to admit. After everything that happened, after everything I lost, after all the fear and uncertainty, I still want to know. I want to know who they were. I want to know why they chose me. I want to know what the symbol means. But I also know that curiosity was the thing that brought me here in the first place. It was curiosity that made me open the first message. Curiosity that made me click the link. Curiosity that made me search for answers. And curiosity that made me realize there was something much bigger happening behind a simple freelance job. The strange thing is, when I think back to the beginning, the warning signs were always there. I just didn't recognize them. The payment that came too quickly, the client who never had a real identity, the files that didn't make sense, the strange instructions, the feeling that someone was watching. Every single part of the story was telling me to stop. But humans are terrible at walking away from unanswered questions, especially when those questions are hidden behind a screen. A message from a stranger can feel harmless. A link can feel harmless. A file can feel harmless. That's what makes the internet different from anything else. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like an opportunity. Sometimes it looks like money. Sometimes it looks like someone finally noticing your work. And sometimes it looks exactly like the thing you've been waiting for. I don't work as a designer anymore. Not professionally. I still create things occasionally. For myself, for friends. But I never upload them. Never share them publicly, never put my name beside them. Maybe that's excessive. Maybe I've let one strange experience change too much about my life. But there is one thing I know. I was lucky. Because whatever happened to me, I was able to walk away. I know that because I eventually found someone else who wasn't. A few years after everything happened, I received a message from a stranger, a designer. They said they had found my old portfolio and wanted to ask me about a client. The same type of work, the same strange requests. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the attachment. It was a screenshot, a conversation between them and the client. At the bottom of the screenshot was a message, the same message I had received years earlier. We think your work would be a good fit. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied with one sentence. Stop before you finish the project. They asked why. I didn't answer. Because I knew the truth. Some warnings are not meant to explain what happens. They're meant to prevent it. And sometimes the only way to understand a warning is to already have ignored it. I never heard back from that designer. I sent the message. I waited. Nothing. At first I assumed they had ignored me. Maybe they thought I was crazy. Maybe they decided I was just some stranger online trying to scare them. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. If someone had sent me the same warning years earlier, I probably would have done the exact same thing. I would have looked for a logical explanation. I would have told myself I was smarter than that I could handle it, that I could figure it out. That's how these things work. Nobody thinks they're walking into something dangerous. They think they're just taking one more step, one more click, one more question, one more search. Then 3 weeks later, I received another email. Not from the designer, from the same anonymous address that had contacted me before. The one I thought was gone. The message was short. We appreciate your concern. I stared at those words. They weren't angry. They weren't threatening. That somehow made them worse, because it meant they weren't worried. They knew exactly what they were doing. The email continued. You misunderstood your role. I almost deleted it. But I kept reading. You were never part of the process. You were part of the observation. I sat there completely still, because that sentence confirmed something I had been afraid of for years. The work had never been about the designs, the money, the files, the logos. Those were just the surface. They were watching how people behaved, how quickly they responded, how much they questioned, how far they would go. They weren't searching for the best designers. They were searching for certain types of people. People who noticed details. People who chased patterns. People who couldn't leave unanswered questions alone. People like me. The final line of the email was the one that stayed with me. Thank you for proving our theory. I deleted the email. This time, I didn't investigate. I didn't search the address. I didn't try to find out what theory they were talking about. I finally understood something. The moment I stopped looking was the moment I took back control. Not because I knew the truth. I didn't. Not because I had solved the mystery. I hadn't. But because I stopped allowing someone else to decide where my attention went. And maybe that was the real test all along. Maybe the most valuable thing anyone can take from you isn't your money, your files, or your identity. It's your focus, your time, your ability to look away. Because once someone knows how to control what you search for, they don't need to hack your computer. They already have access. I think about that sometimes. How easily it happened. Not with some sophisticated attack, not with someone breaking through impossible security systems. It happened because I was curious, because I wanted an opportunity, because someone offered me something that seemed too good to ignore. That is the part that scares me the most. The fact that nothing about the beginning felt dangerous. If the first message had been threatening, I would have ignored it. If the website had looked suspicious, I would have closed it. If the person behind it had acted strangely, I would have walked away. But they didn't. They acted exactly how someone trustworthy would act. Professional, polite, patient. They made everything feel normal, and that was the trick. The most dangerous things online rarely look dangerous. They look convenient. They look interesting. They look like opportunities. Years later, I still occasionally receive freelance messages. A stranger asking if I can help with a project. A company offering easy work. A person claiming they found my old designs and wants something similar. I never respond. Not anymore. Maybe most of them are completely innocent. Maybe some are genuine opportunities. But I learned something that I can't forget. You never really know who is on the other side of the screen. You don't know what they want. You don't know what they already know. And you don't know whether the first conversation is the beginning of something or the continuation of something that started long before you noticed. I still have one final piece of evidence from that entire experience. Something I never deleted. Not because I wanted to keep it, because I was afraid of what might happen if I did. It's an old screenshot, the first message from the client, the one offering me the job, the one that started everything. For years, it showed the same thing, a username, a payment offer, a simple request. Then recently, I opened it again, and something had changed. At the bottom of the message, underneath where I accepted the project, there was another line, a line that wasn't there before. It said, "Candidate confirmed." I stared at those words for a long time, because I don't know if they were always there. I don't know if I missed them, or if someone added them later. And maybe that's the thing that bothers me most. After everything I experienced, after everything I learned, I still don't know when I stopped being the person looking for answers and became the person they were studying. So if you ever receive a message from someone you've never met online, offering you an easy opportunity, a simple job, a chance to make money doing something harmless, maybe take a moment before you click. Look at who sent it. Look at what they're asking for. And ask yourself one question. Not, what do they want from me? But something much more important. Why did they choose me? Because sometimes the darkest things hiding online aren't the things that are trying to get inside your computer. Sometimes they're the things waiting for you to open the door. I wish I could say that after all of that, I finally understood everything. I didn't. Maybe nobody ever does. The internet is full of stories where there is a clear beginning and a clear ending. Someone gets hacked, someone finds the person responsible, someone exposes the truth. But real life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you find something you weren't supposed to find. Sometimes you learn enough to know you should stop. And sometimes the scariest part is accepting that you may never know the full story. For years, I wondered whether I had been targeted because of something specific, a skill, a mistake, a connection I didn't know about. But eventually I started thinking about something else. Maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe I was just one person in a much larger system. A person who happened to notice something. A person who happened to ask questions. A person who happened to keep looking. Because the more time I spent thinking about it, the more I realized how many people experience something similar every day. Not the same situation, not the same symbol, not the same mysterious client, but small moments. A strange email, a suspicious message, a website that knows too much, a company asking for just a little more information. Most people ignore those things. Most people move on. And maybe that's exactly why these things work. Because the internet has trained us to accept strange things. A website tracking your location, an app asking for access to your photos, a company collecting information about your habits. Things that would have seemed impossible years ago are now normal. We have become comfortable giving away pieces of ourselves. A little information here, a little trust there, never enough to feel dangerous. Until one day, someone has enough pieces to see the whole picture. That was what frightened me the most. Not that someone had my information, not that someone had watched me. It was the idea that I had unknowingly helped build a version of myself that someone else understood better than I did. They knew what I would click, what would interest me, what questions I would ask. They knew the worst part, and the worst part, I had shown them. Every decision I made was information. Every search, every message, every attempt to investigate. I thought I was finding them, but I was revealing myself. Even now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had ignored the first message, if I had deleted it, if I had never accepted the job. Would they have contacted someone else? Would they have found another designer? Would someone else have followed the trail instead? I don't know. Maybe the story would have happened exactly the same way. Maybe I was never important. Maybe I was just available. But there is one thing I'm certain of. The internet creates the illusion that everything is separate. Every website, every account, every conversation. But behind the screens, everything connects. And somewhere out there, there are people who understand those connections much better than the rest of us. That's what I think about now. Not the messages, not the recordings, not the symbol, the connections. Because once you realize how much information exists about you, you start to wonder something uncomfortable. Who else has already put the pieces together? I don't have a dramatic ending to this story. There was no arrest, no news report, no moment where everything was explained, no person standing in front of a camera admitting what they had done. For a long time that bothered me. I wanted a conclusion. I wanted someone to tell me I was right. I wanted someone to confirm that everything I experienced was real. But eventually I realized something. A lack of answers was an answer in itself. Some things don't end because someone solves them. They end because you decide to stop searching. And that's what I had to do. I had to accept that there were things I would never know. I would never know who the client really was. I would never know how long they had been watching me. I would never know why a symbol I created years earlier seemed to exist before I ever made it. And I would never know what happened to the other people who followed the same path. Maybe they walked away. Maybe they figured it out earlier than I did. Maybe some of them are still searching. That thought still bothers me, because I know how easy it is to get trapped by curiosity. When you find something strange online, the first instinct is always to investigate. You want answers. You want proof. You want to be the person who discovers something nobody else noticed. But sometimes the smartest thing you can do is accept that you noticed it and leave it alone. I learned that the hard way. The internet gives everyone the ability to search for anything. But nobody talks about the responsibility that comes with finding things. Because once you know something exists, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to the person you were before. Before you noticed the pattern, before you saw the connection, before you realized the thing you thought was random might not have been random at all. A few months ago, I deleted the final remaining copy of every file connected to that project. Not moved, not archived, deleted. For years I had kept backups because I was afraid. I thought keeping evidence would protect me. But eventually I understood that holding on to it was keeping me connected. So I removed everything. The designs, the screenshots, the messages, the documents, everything. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Not completely. I don't think you ever completely forget something like this. But enough. Enough to sleep normally. Enough to stop checking over my shoulder. Enough to use the internet without wondering who might be watching. At least most of the time. Because every now and then, I still see something. a logo, a symbol, a familiar shape hidden somewhere it shouldn't be. And for a second, I wonder. I wonder if it's connected. I wonder if someone is trying to remind me. Then I remember the lesson I learned. Not every strange thing is a message. Not every pattern is a warning. Sometimes a symbol is just a symbol. Sometimes a coincidence is just a coincidence. And sometimes the most terrifying thing you can do is keep looking for something that wants to be found.